Okay, there we go. Sorry, I was muted for a sec. Hey, welcome back to Psychology of Adjustment. Let me double check that. I'm not muted, right? Okay. I'm not muted. Okay, just making sure. Sorry about that. Okay, welcome back to Psychology of Adjustment. We are finishing up our chapter textbook. Feels crazy to say that, but we are wrapping up chapter 16, which means we're done with our textbook, the Psych of Adjustment text. So thank you so much for sticking with me and sticking with the text this far. We're going to close out on a positive note. Literally, we're going to talk about a not brand new, it's been around since like the 80s, but a relatively new perspective in psychology, and that is positive psychology. So the first section, we're going to look at kind of the origins, the scope of this perspective. So after this section, you'll be able to define what positive psychology is, explain why it provides a new framework, and also identify some of the lines of inquiry that positive psychologists might attempt to study. The name that you should associate with this perspective is Martin Seligman. He is considered the founder. I said it originates from the 80s. It's really the 90s, so I misspoke a moment ago. So really, we can kind of point to around the mid to late 90s is when we see the emergence of positive psychology. And really, it's Martin Seligman and others like him viewed this as a counterweight to more the negatively oriented history of psychology. Since World War II, for example, psychology is really focused on the disease model in terms of treating stress and disorders, which is great. But also, people like Martin Seligman, for example, would argue that we should also look at and study and learn from lives that are fulfilled, that are, people who are living, quote unquote, their best lives, not just people who are stressed or dealing with mental illness, for example. So there's this huge push of positive psychology, and it really looks at, rather than human limitations or weaknesses, instead the focus is on their strengths and how people flourish and how people can be successful, how people can successfully adjust to the world around them. So you have this goal kind of looking at how do people flourish. So there's this concept of flourishing, where you have, where your positive psychology is to help people, for their mental health flourish. So we look at this concept of flourish having high levels of well-being with low levels of mental illness. So it's kind of a 2x2 continuum. You have, well-being and mental illness, maybe stress. We might even replace that word with stress at times. So a person with low levels of well-being along with high levels of mental illness or stress perhaps is considered to be floundering, maybe really struggling. Actually, probably struggling isn't the right word. Someone with high levels of each may be struggling. With low levels of each, they might be languishing. So depending on how we think about this, individual, this is where we want to be. We want to look at and study, positive psychologists want to look at getting people from these three quadrants into this fourth quadrant where you're high in well-being, but low in stress, low in mental illness. And when we talk about well-being, it involves elements of emotion, psychological, as well as social well-being. So this is a new way of thinking about psychology. It is essentially a turning point for the field of psychology. Now, one of the big pushbacks about positive psychology is the similarities it has to humanistic psychology, which is not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of it's really expanding on some of the ideas that have been around since the 1950s, but there is a lot of overlap, a lot of optimism about the human condition, for example, can be found in both perspectives. So there are three lines of inquiry that are of primary interest to positive psychologists. These are considered the three main legs, which actually is kind of a weird way to put it. I'm not going to lie. Maybe we go with pillars instead of three legs. Anyways, so one, positive subjective experiences, like when people experience good moods, when they're happy, when they're in love, very positive experiences. Positive individual traits, what character strengths and virtues allow us to flourish, for example. And also positive institutions, families, schools, social work, or supportive social environments, work environments that allow us to flourish instead of flounder or languish, for example. So the first pillar we're going to look at are positive subjective experiences. So we're going to start with looking at the difference between mood and emotions. Afterwards, you'll be able to talk about and explain the flow experience, and also outlining the advantages of using mindfulness over mindlessness, which I gotta love to read about and talk about, because mindfulness was part of my PhD studies in educational psychology. So this stuff is like right up my alley. So when we talk about this first pillar, we're talking about positive subjective experiences. These are positive but private feelings and thoughts people have about themselves and the world around us. When you wake up, go throughout your day, those good moments you're experiencing throughout the day. Maybe it's sitting around enjoying a nice cup of coffee when it's quiet in the morning. Maybe it's satisfaction from your work or home life, whatever. But these are the kinds of experiences that psychologists have linked to success in terms of relationships, health, income, all of these good things we want out of life. The more positive subjective experiences we have, and the better. Experiencing more positive states tend to be more focused and triggered by sensual experiences and pleasures and touch. Also, memories of past pleasurable moments can evoke positive states, like thinking back to having a really good day at work or having a really good experience with a friend. Those memories can kind of promote a good mood, or even when we're removed from those experiences. And so ultimately, now we're getting into kind of distinguishing between mood and emotion. Ideally, positive moods and positive emotions go hand in hand with those subjective experiences. But moods are just kind of our general global response to experiences. Mood isn't necessarily the same thing as emotion. Your emotions, there's some overlap there. It's much more for example, like somebody who is maybe slow to wake up, they're kind of grumpier in the morning, for example, that would be like considered their mood, versus, feeling individual emotions like, anger or happiness, which can be much more, momentary. There's a lot of benefits from being in a good mood. People tend to be more agreeable with others when they're in a good mood. People are more helpful to people in a good mood. People make better decisions also when they're in a good mood, and they're better able to solve problems. They're better able to think outside of the box. Like creativity kind of goes hand in hand with being in a good mood. And this is demonstrated with the candle task. Maybe you remember this from intro psych. You have a problem here. You have a box of matches, you have candle, you have tacks, and your goal is to get the candle onto the wall without allowing any wax to drip. And people who are in a good mood are quicker at finding the solution, which is just simply empty the box and tack the box, put the candle on the box there like that. So also positive moods, we tend to think faster. Which is, illustrated in research here. We think faster, and also, our measure of experience, psychological experience, tends to be higher. We have higher energy when we're in a positive mood. So lots of benefits there. Now, this is a little bit different from emotions. Emotions are a little bit different. Like emotions are part of our mood, but they're not the same thing. Emotions tend to be more uncontrollable feelings that go hand in hand with physiological changes. Emotions are physiological changes in the body linked to the autonomic nervous system. And so positive emotions, in this case, we're talking about pleasant responses to events that ultimately promote social connection with other people, and also include some of those subjective states, like feeling joyous, feeling happy, feeling excited, feeling grateful, all of those positive things that tend to bring us toward people rather than away from them. And this is different from negative emotions, which tend to be unpleasant, usually in response to some kind of threat or perceived danger. These might include things like sadness, guilt, anxiety, fear, worry, all of the above. Now, negative emotions tend to get more, we study negative emotions more than positive ones for a number of reasons. The evolutionary significance of those emotions, they're related to the fight or flight response. And there's just so many negative emotional experiences that there's just a lot to work with there. Thinking about some different models for explaining, how mood goes hand in hand with positive subjective experiences. We have, Barbara Fredrickson, for example. She created the broaden and build model of positive emotions. And this is used to explain how those emotions benefit us. For one, they spark this non-specific action tendencies that tend to lead to more adaptive responses, like helping people in need when we're happy. Like we're just more willing to help others when you're happy. So, if you ever need help from somebody, make sure they're in a good mood first. If they're in a bad mood and they're pissed off, for example, or mad or depressed or stressed, they're probably far less likely to help you. Those emotions, those positive emotions, also help broaden or deepen our ability to think, cognitive process. We use thought action tendencies. For example, like children become much more imaginative. They become more creative when they're feeling joy, when they're feeling happy, as opposed to those negative emotions. Fredrickson and Brannigan kind of adapting from this, the experience of joy increases our thought action tendencies. We think more outside of the box when we think more creatively. We're open to new experiences when we are feeling positive emotions like joy instead of negative ones. So these models, that broad and build model, talks about positive emotions broadening our outlook, and also the resources we might use to kind of adapt and adjust to the world around us. So really we just see the world in a much different way when we're experiencing positive emotions. Okay, you can read about some of the research here from Fredrickson, but for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and move forward. Fredrickson talked about the undoing hypothesis, another explanation of why positive emotions are so good and so important is because they assist our mind, our body in recovering from all of the negative emotions we might experience on any given day. It kind of balances it out. Like maybe part of your day you're stressed out, but then you get to come home and relax and really enjoy yourself. And all that stress just kind of disappears. So in this case, when we're stressed, positive emotions are in a sense like a buffer. They undo the effects of stressors, and typically, pretty quickly. Going from that positive, maybe negative moods, emotions to more positive can be very beneficial. One specific positive subjective experience that positive psychologists have studied, quite intensely is a flow state. This is when you become a flow state is when you become so immersed or involved or engaged in an activity that you are there fully in the present. You are engaging in an experience that's interesting, challenging, and also intrinsically rewarding. This is not just something just so easy that you don't even have to think about. This is something that's taking up a lot of your mental resources. You're fully immersed into it. Some people experience flow, for example, when they're playing sports. Some people experience it when they're working, like if they get into a workflow. Some people experience it with playing music, but the flow state is this really optimal kind of peak experience of positive moods and emotions. So when we're in this state, there's a lot of benefits. We become less aware and lose all track of time. We just become fully immersed. We're able to concentrate deeply and effectively, and we focus energy and attention on that particular task, especially when it's challenging. We really have to devote a lot of our resources to it. So for example, somebody who is sculpting, like this example here, to become fully immersed in this activity, and really just you're putting everything else outside of your mind and fully kind of going all in on what you're doing at that time. That is the flow state. And the primary research, I know it's a bit of a mouthful, and I'm going to hopefully get this right. It's Csikszentmihalyi. And he's written the book on flow. Still conducts research on flow and talked about, the activities. It's activities that elicit flow are ones that have any kind of a nice balance of challenge plus skill level. Like it is challenging, but you have the requisite skills to actually do it. It's not too easy, but also not too difficult either. When those criteria met, that balance, the activity then becomes intrinsically rewarding, meaning you're doing it for the sake of doing it, not because you're waiting on some kind of reward or outcome, but just simply to do it. And usually you see positive emotions and also goal attainment and achievement. So lots of benefits are coming from this flow state. One of the questions worth asking, though, is does everyone find flow? The research shows it is not as common as we might think. About 20% of respondents in American and European samples say they've experienced flow several times a day. However, about 15% have never reported the experience, have not reported the flow experience. So some people are really more prone to experiencing it, maybe some less. There are personality characteristics such as those who are persistent, those who seek out new things, novelty, open to new experiences, and also those who can transcend themselves are much more likely to experience this flow state. Another positive state that's worth mentioning is mindfulness. And this is where you are fully immersed in the present and you're much more sensitive to kind of the context situation. And a way to really demonstrate what mindfulness is comparing it to the opposite, which is mindlessness, which is when our mind is all over the place. Mindfulness is really being intently focused on the present. So some things in order to be mindful, or more mindful, I should say, one, resisting the impulse to control uncertainty, become less prone to evaluate ourselves, and behave in a less scripted manner. So these are kind of things you have to do, or mental kind of hurdles to get over in order to be mindful, as opposed to mindfulness. But mindfulness goes hand in hand with subjective well-being. A lot of benefits. Research shows it improves student learning outcomes, helps young girls overcome gender stereotypes, helps musicians play more musicality, helps individuals regulate their heartbeats better, like physiologically speaking. So tons and tons of benefits. I did my doctoral dissertation on mindfulness and test anxiety. Didn't find anything quite as cool as this, but there's a ton of application to it. So how can we be more mindful? How can we practice mindfulness? One of the primary ways of practicing the skill of mindfulness is through meditation. I mean, you can be mindful in any given setting, but practicing meditation, maybe where you sit on a cushion, and maybe it involves closing your eyes, or maybe focusing on a particular stimuli like a candle flame or the tip of your nose, whatever, and you're simply watching the breath come in and go out. That's a form of meditation called mindfulness meditation. And it's just like a muscle. The more you do it, the more you practice it, the more easy it is to be mindful. It is a skill that takes practice. And here are some other benefits that are associated, or qualities that are associated with practicing mindfulness meditation: developing a non-judgmental characteristic, being more acceptant, practicing loving kindness, meaning being compassionate to yourself and other people, gentleness, gratitude, empathy, lots of benefits here. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go over all of these, but these are the kinds of things that are being cultivated as you practice mindfulness meditation. Another way to enjoy those subjective positive experiences is through savoring, making those pleasurable experiences that elicit those positive emotions, making them last. Like if you're eating really good food, for example, instead of just scarfing it down really fast and mindlessly, you savor it, you enjoy each bite, and you really immerse yourself into that. So focusing on and valuing and boosting enjoyment, of each experience, by kind of slowing things down. And this is a new concept in positive psychology. It's very much an active process where you're thinking about the journey, not necessarily the outcome. It's how you get there, not when you get there, or where there is, for example. Some factors that might determine or influence the intensity of savoring: the duration, the more time spent savoring, the better. Stress reduction, like, are we stressed, are we not? The complexity of the tasks, so more complex events enhance savoring, really enjoying, being successful in complex environments. Balancing your self-monitoring. Too much, too little can actually distort your ability to savor in the moment. And social connection. We know that savoring goes better with friends. Enjoying a good meal with a friend, more often than not, is better than enjoying it by yourself. So social connection. Let's talk about some positive individual traits now that promote, this idea of living our best lives, living the good life. You'll be able to explain the concept of positive individual traits. You'll be able to define hope, resilience, post-traumatic growth, and grit as beneficial qualities, and clarify why gratitude is a character strength. So some positive individual traits. We've talked about personality before. We've talked about personality traits. So really, we're just getting back into that realm of personality traits, those dispositions that attempt to explain why some people are more happy or more healthier and have higher well-being than others. The 4 traits that we're going to look at is having hope, being resilient, showing grit, and being grateful. Those are 4 traits that we strongly associate with being living a more positive life. So hope is simply just achieving your future goals, thinking about future goals and your expectations that those goals can be achieved. Like many of you right now, you're taking this class, Psychology of Adjustment, with the hope that you can get a degree, you can get a better job, you can learn more and understand people better. I mean, all kinds of things you might be hoping for. And the researcher, the positive psychologist Snyder talks about, there's these two components to hope. One, it's part of agency, your judgment about whether or not the goal can be achieved, and then the pathways. What are the realistic options towards achieving that goal? And based on this construct, there is a hope scale that actually measures and assesses your degree of hope, or an individual's degree of hope. And you can actually take that. I think the same item is in your textbook. You can pause here if you want to take it here, or you can just open up your textbook and check that out if you'd like. But this scale will give you kind of an estimate of how hopeful you are. There's a lot of benefits from being hopeful. Hopeful people tend to experience more positive emotions. They tend to expect to be better off in the future, believe they'll be able to handle stress better, more likely to be flexible thinkers, more likely to think outside the box, more likely to also have social support as well. Another characteristic that's important is resilience. We all of us encounter stressors, and the ability to recover and also prosper during those stressful events can be really important. We call this resilience. It can be like mindfulness. It can be cultivated and developed, by going through experiences that challenge you, and successfully navigating those experiences is a way to practice and cultivate the quality of resilience. And a lot of times we see this also with this post-traumatic growth. When somebody goes through something traumatic, they might, the silver lining of that experience is maybe they gain a degree of enhanced personal strength. Maybe that's psychological strength and how to deal with future situations, future, stressful or traumatic events. So here are some ways to cultivate resilience. I'm not going to read over all of these, but you can kind of, read over them yourselves. So fostering connection with family members, friends, community, moving towards your goal, keeping on the lookout for opportunities, keep events, especially troubling ones, in perspective. So all of these different ways in which you can cultivate and develop resilience. It's just like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets. Aspects of traumatic growth. Some people experience perceptual changes where their self is perceived as a survivor, not a victim. So they have a complete change in how they view themselves. They might experience relationship change, such as forming closer bonds with your loved ones. They might have changes in life priorities, meaning they're not as concerned about money, possessions, social status as before. Think about it. If you come really close to, let's say you have a traumatic experience that almost leads to your mortality, you almost die. Living through that and surviving through something like that may give you a completely different outlook on life. And maybe before you were focused on getting things, getting stuff. Now it's not so much. It's more, instead of quantity, you're more focused on quality. You want to have a good quality life, and that doesn't necessarily always mean having more money or possessions. Grit is another construct or another trait that is really helpful in explaining how people thrive and adjust positively. So being able to persevere, have passion, kind of being able to grind through maybe adversity to achieve your long-term goals. So researchers like Duckworth talk about people as being gritty are those who approach achievement as a marathon, not a sprint. It's kind of like the Nipsey Hussle. The marathon continues, the grind never stops. And again, it's kind of getting back to that idea of it's the journey, not the end point. So people who demonstrate more grit, at least in terms of academic success, tend to have higher GPA in college and perform better in spelling bees, so actual academic competitions. Being grateful is also really important. Basically recognizing and concentrating on the good things you have in your life and being thankful for them, as opposed to thinking about, oh, what do I not have and what do I want instead. A lot of benefits from being grateful. I personally find it, really beneficial to think about at least one thing that I'm grateful every day, and I'll even write it down in my little notebook here. But being grateful, a lot of benefits: enhanced social connections, extended positive moods, affect, emotions, more feelings of joy and contentment. And grateful people overall tend to have a better well-being, a more positive sense of well-being. Okay, one of the last sort of pillars we're going to look at is the positive institutions. So we'll look at characterizing the nature of positive institutions and describe the characteristics of positive workplaces, schools, and identify some virtues associated with positive institutions. So when we say positive institutions, these are organizations that cultivate positive values, civic virtues, encouraging people to be good citizens and help promote the overall collective good. In positive workplaces specifically, there's a greater movement towards more positive organizational behavior, and essentially improving worker performance, and also improving like your work life, like not just making sure you're actually not miserable at your job. Rezanowski, for example, looked at workers, typically look at their job in one of three ways. They look at it as just a job. That's where I go, collect a paycheck. It's a career, meaning maybe this is something I, maybe enjoy, and know I can do for the rest of my life. Or it could be a calling. This is somebody who is more intrinsically motivated by their job. They're called to teach, they're called to medicine or whatever. And this group tend to view their work as a means of personal fulfillment and social purpose, not so much like, oh, it's a paycheck. It's a way a way to earn more money. Schools as well are another example of positive institutions. Obviously if you're watching this video right now, chances are you're a college student, and you may, often think about your satisfaction, what sort of judgments are you making about your school experience? There's a cognitive element to it, basically what students believe about their educational experiences, combined with the affective component, whether or not you're experiencing positive and negative emotions, or the blend of the two in school settings. School satisfaction is a really good predictor of academic progress, even as early as kindergarten. Like kids who enjoy their school experiences tend to do better. A question that's worth asking: can institutions be virtuous? I mean, think about, there are lots of like horror stories of corporate America, or not even just corporate America. I mean, public and private institutions, a lot of horror stories involved, with people being mistreated for various reasons. So, it's a really important question to ask. So Peterson, for example, lists the virtues that make institutions positive contributors to their, to people's lives, as opposed to more of a negative experience. So giving people purpose, treating them fairly, promoting humanity, showing them care, promoting safety and dignity. When institutions focus on these core values or these core virtues, that can be very beneficial to the people in these institutions, whether it's a school, whether it's your job, your home life, whatever. These are the keys to success. All right, last thing we're going to look at, I think it's our last thing, or one of our last two things, are the problems and prospects within positive psychology. So we'll look at some criticisms concerning positive psychology, and also future opportunities for positive psychology. So what are the problems? Problems of positive psychology. It's been criticized. Some people really just wonder, is this really new? I mean, is this really a paradigm shift, or is this like a new way of repackaging humanistic psychology, like I mentioned earlier? Or maybe it's just some kind of passing fad. I mean, we're still talking about it. It came around roughly the, mid to late 90s, and we're still talking about it. So I don't think it's a passing fad, but I think, maybe there's some fair criticism there about the connection to humanistic psychology. That's fair enough. What are the prospects? In order to judge positive psychology, we have to look at the research findings, and also the application of those research findings. That's really the ultimate determination of its success. Now we're going to look at one last topic, boosting your own happiness. So how you'll be able to explain how expressions of gratitude can promote happiness, recognize the psychological benefits of sharing a positive story about oneself, sharing good news, and engaging in pro-social spending, like donating, for example. So some things that you can do to be more happy. Expressing gratitude is one of those things. And perhaps, like I said, I write things down I'm grateful for, but also it's important to express, your gratitude to people who've helped you in your life. It can be a very meaningful experience. You might actually write them a letter. I know it sounds weird. I know we don't hardly write letters anymore, but, write them a letter, not just an email or a text. Deliver in person if you can, and then follow up with them. Really have a meaningful engagement experience on multiple levels here to really show someone you appreciate them. Another way to promote happiness is sharing about yourself, sharing stories. Doing the right thing, for example, but maybe you didn't necessarily want to brag about it. There are times it's okay to talk about your good deeds. Maybe you write an essay, and submit it somewhere. I don't know, a journal or a newspaper or whatever. You can post your stories online and share and reach more people, but simply sharing your good experiences can be very, very beneficial for you and people reading about those experiences. It's important to capitalize or to share good news as well. We call this capitalizing, where you're telling other people, good things are happening in your lives. And I think that's a really good thing, whether it's happening to you or just in the world in general. But this, sharing good news boosts positive emotions and helps us, feel better. We feel better when we share with others the good things that are happening. Another thing that makes us happy is to spend our money in a pro-social way, like not recklessly spending things. It could involve money to benefit others, like donating. It could be small pleasures for yourself, like every now and then treating yourself. Maybe you have an ice cream cone on a day, maybe as a reward to yourself. Buying more experiences rather than products, maybe seeing a movie as opposed to, I don't know, buying I don't know, buying a new shirt or something, something that maybe you can hang out with your friends and talk about maybe before and after. So also a lot of benefits from donating, being charitable. A lot of research shows it's good to be charitable. So who says you can't buy happiness? This is a pretty funny, this is an example, probably not an example of that pro-social spending. So anyways, that's going to wrap up chapter 16. I can't believe we're now at the end of our chapter, or the end of our textbook. We're at the end of our course. Thank you for sticking with me this far. Let me know if you have any questions. Jump on my office hours or leave a comment here on Canvas. Otherwise, take care. Be good and be safe. Peace.